If you're dealing with pancreatic insufficiency, you're probably also dealing with some symptoms that are not super pleasant. So in this video, I'm going to try to help you understand what might be going on and steps you can take to improve the situation. And I'm also going to share some viewpoints that you probably haven't heard before. Let's jump in.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
So I've been getting a lot of questions lately about this issue. I'm not a doctor. I don't want you to view anything here as medical advice or to restrict your desire to get medical advice if you need help. But we talk a lot about digestion, and so I've been getting a lot of questions on this topic and want to share some insights here. And when we're looking at this pancreatic insufficiency issue, basically we're looking at the delivery of pancreatic enzymes. And enzymes are really needed to help us break down proteins and fats. And I need my pen. And carbohydrates. And it comes right here out of the pancreas and comes down here into this duodenum. The duodenum is like the first 10 to 12 inches of the small intestine. So the enzymes are delivered here, and they really help us break our food down and get all the nutrients out of that food. So that can be very important for those digestive purposes. But when we want to understand, well, why wouldn't we be delivering these enzymes? The enzymes are going to help us digest food. We're eating food, so why wouldn't my body just give them to me? Well, we want to dig into some of these things, and let's look at some of the symptoms that can show up with this pancreatic insufficiency. And we see symptoms like oily diarrhea, steatorrhea, which is basically where it's like a diarrhea issue that's very light in colored, and they'll often see undigested fats in that stool. And we see bloating and gas and fatigue and cramps and pain in the stomach. We see loss of muscle cramps, and a variety of vitamin deficiencies. And when we're looking at these symptoms, it can kind of start to give us some clues of what may be going on. So when you're researching this topic, one thing that most people seem to agree on is that this hormone cholecystokinin seems to be the triggering factor to get that pancreas to release these pancreatic enzymes. And the cholecystokinin, or CKK, like all the cool kids call it, is released here in the duodenum. So when we look on this Cleveland Clinic website and it says, what does cholecystokinin do? We see that it stimulates your gallbladder to contract and release bile into your small intestine. Cholecystokinin actually means to move the gallbladder. And it stimulates your pancreas to release pancreatic enzymes. And this is what the other name, pancreozymin, means. Some people call it pancreozymin. So it appears that people feel like when we eat food, that triggers this cholecystokinin to be produced, and it's the cholecystokinin that then's triggering this gallbladder to squirt the bile down here into the duodenum to help us emulsify our dietary fats and also help us neutralize acids that are coming from the stomach. And that cholecystokinin also triggers the pancreas to bring these pancreatic enzymes down to help us really digest the food and get all the nutrients out of that food. And beyond just triggering the gallbladder and triggering the pancreas, it can also trigger the hypothalamus to tell your body that, hey, I'm satisfied. I got a level of satiety. I don't need a bunch more food. So that seems to be part of that function as well. And what we hear a lot about is that this cholecystokinin can be triggered by protein or fats, but not carbohydrates. So that's interesting because a lot of people will eat a lot of carbohydrates and they won't feel that satiety like they do when they consume proteins or fats. Like, oh, I'm going to have a potato chip, and oh, I ate the whole bag. I had a keg of potato chips because just eating these carbs was not giving me any type of satiety. But this explanation seems to be a vague, high-level explanation, because when you dig deeper, you hear from people saying things like, this cholecystokinin is triggered by partially digested proteins and fats. In the Britannica's Encyclopedia Scientific explanation of the cholecystokinin, it says that it's secreted by cells of the upper small intestine, which is that duodenum that we were just talking about. Its secretion is stimulated by the introduction of hydrochloric acid, amino acids, or fatty acids into the stomach or duodenum. Cholecystokinin stimulates the gallbladder to contract and release stored bile into the intestine. It also stimulates the secretion of pancreatic juice and may induce satiety. So that goes along with this satiety stuff that we were just talking about. But this here says that the cholecystokinin that is in charge of triggering the gallbladder and the pancreas to do their jobs is actually triggered by hydrochloric acid or stomach acid in the stomach. Or it's triggered by amino acids. Well, amino acids come from protein that has been broken down by hydrochloric acid. Here's the problem. It's very common today for someone not to be making enough stomach acid. Millions of people around the world are turning off their stomach acid on purpose. But even without those medications that turn off stomach acid, there's a wide variety of issues that can restrict a person's ability to create that hydrochloric acid and really acidify their food in a way that helps them break that food down. So if this has to be acidified in order to really trigger this cholecystokinin, because it said it's either triggered by hydrochloric acid or amino acids or fatty acids. Well, a lot of people aren't making enough stomach acid. A lot of people live in the 80s and they're still running from dietary fat because they still believe that, oh, dietary fat is bad for us, like we believed in the 80s when we were wearing parachute pants. So if they can't break down their protein and turn it into those amino acids that can trigger this cholecystokinin, and if they're not producing enough hydrochloric acid to trigger this cholecystokinin, and they're not consuming any dietary fats, well, it wouldn't really get triggered, would it? So if this isn't triggered, then that doesn't trigger the pancreas to do its job. So is it a problem where the pancreas can't produce these enzymes, or is the pancreas just sitting around waiting to be told to do its job? I don't know. I don't know what the real deal is. There's a lot of things that go on that are kind of complicated in the body, but this seems to make actual sense. So this situation of low stomach acid is also known as hypochlorhydria. And we'll put some links in the description below to these studies that I'm showing you, but also some studies that give us some indications that low stomach acid can lead to problems where the bile is not flowing correctly. It becomes too thick and sticky to flow correctly. And since we're understanding that the cholecystokinin is what is responsible for triggering the gallbladder to squirt that bile down there in the duodenum, then it would make sense that if there was no hydrochloric acid to trigger that cholecystokinin and there was no amino acids and no dietary fats, then the bile would just stay in the gallbladder. It wouldn't get triggered to come down and help digest the foods in this duodenum area. So since we see that there's that connection between the lack of stomach acid and gallbladder problems, then wouldn't it make sense that those problems could also exist with the pancreas? If the cholecystokinin is not available to trigger the gallbladder, then it would also not be available to trigger the pancreas. So let's look here on the Cleveland Clinic, and it says that hypochlorhydria is a deficiency of stomach acid. If you don't have enough acid, you can't digest food properly or absorb its nutrients. It leads to indigestion, malnutrition, and sometimes a bacterial overgrowth. And when we look at these symptoms back here, a lot of these symptoms that can go along with pancreatic insufficiency are symptoms that we see with a lack of stomach acid or a lack of bile flow. Diarrhea, and this type of diarrhea, the steatorrhea, that's a lack of bile flow because the bile is what darkens our stool. When there's a pale or light colored stool, it's often because this bile is not flowing correctly. Gas is also a sign of poor bile flow. Fatigue can come from an inability to really break your food down and get the nutrients out of that food. Pain in the stomach can often come from this bloating that can happen when there's not enough acid to break the food down. So the food has to break down by rotting and fermenting, and it creates all these gases and pressure. And the lack of stomach acid also allows the bad guys to come in and set up camp. That stomach acid doesn't just help us digest our food, it's the barrier to the whole body. So when bad guys come in on the food we're eating, they're supposed to die in an acid bath. So that's why that Cleveland Clinic paper was talking about how when there's not enough stomach acid, it can lead to overgrowth issues like bacteria problems. We see a loss of muscle because to make muscle, you need to be able to break proteins down into amino acids. The body can't use chicken to rebuild muscles with. It has to be able to break that protein down into the amino acids that the body can use as the building blocks. Vitamin deficiencies, well, that makes sense. If you can't really break down your food and get all the nutrients out of it, all those enzymes really help us get all the nutrients out of that food. And when we look at this study here, it was talking about basically associations that are seen with this pancreatic insufficiency issue. And one of the correlations that they were looking at was PPI use and pancreatic insufficiency. That was one of the combination things that they wanted to look at to see how strong this correlation was. And they said that 59.9% of patients diagnosed with pancreatic insufficiency were taking PPI therapy at the time of the testing, compared to only 37% of the patients without that insufficiency. So they're saying that the PPI therapy doubled the odds of pancreatic insufficiency after all the adjustments that they looked in their statistical model. So that's a pretty significant number, 59%. So that's a model where people were turning off stomach acid on purpose. But like I was saying, there's a lot of reasons that a person might not be able to make enough stomach acid. And the really tricky part is that the body needs minerals and other nutrients to make that hydrochloric acid. So if you can't break down your food well enough to get all the nutrients out of that food, well, now you don't have enough nutrients to create this hydrochloric acid. And a person can get stuck in this broken digestion for years or decades. So what it seems like is that if a person was not making enough stomach acid, they could take steps to improve the acidity of the stomach so that they can break that food down correctly and turn the proteins into amino acids. And then that stomach acid coming down here into the duodenum, or the amino acids coming down here into the duodenum, could then trigger this cholecystokinin to be activated, and that could trigger the gallbladder to squirt this bile down to help us digest our food better, and it could also trigger the pancreas to squirt those enzymes in there to help us digest our food correctly. If that's what's restricting this pancreas from delivering those enzymes, that would make a little bit of sense. Here's the problem. This doesn't appear to be the solution when you look at the medical literature. It doesn't seem to be the problem. Just because it makes sense doesn't really mean anything, I guess. So it doesn't seem to be the issue. But what we look at is the advice out there seems to be, well, just supplement with digestive enzymes. And we have a lot of clients supplement with digestive enzymes as we age. There's other reasons that the body might not make enough enzymes, and supplementing with digestive enzymes is pretty easy to do. But it also seems that if there's other digestive malfunctions, if there's no stomach acid there or not enough stomach acid, or if bile has become too thick and sticky to flow correctly, taking steps to correct those two systems seem like, well, at least the first hammers can drop. You know, if this other hammer is not dropping, it's because the steps before it don't seem to be happening. So that would make sense. Why not just take steps to see if we can fix these other hammers? Does the third hammer drop as well? I don't know. But if you're dealing with any digestive symptoms at all, we have lots of videos on digestive symptoms. You can just search our videos to find the one that you're dealing with and see if you can get some insights on how to correct that. Also, my book, Kick Your Fat in the Nuts, chapters 3 and 4, walk you through figuring out which aspects of digestion are not working correctly and steps you can take to correct those. And the book is available on Amazon, but I'll put a link in the description below so you can get the whole thing totally for free, and then you can just jump to chapters 3 and 4. And then you can let us know here in the comments, does this help your situation? Does fixing a low stomach acid seem to improve your ability to digest your food? Do the pancreas seem to make enzymes for you when that's triggered? We don't know, but you can let us know in the comments of this video. Now, if you're not sure where your stomach acid lies, you can jump over right now and check out our video on 10 signs of low stomach acid to gain more insights to see if that might be a problem for you that might be worth correcting. I can't wait to hear about your results.